Good morning. Still morning, at least here. So great to be here with all of you. It's good. We at the Oceanic Network, my CEO is here. I hope you'll hear her later today, but Liz Burdock, but we like getting together in rooms like this to keep everything energized and moving forward. So it is good to be back with you again. Our focus today, putting steel in the water. And we have a great panel, and we're going to be moving, we hope, at lightning speed. So just to frame this out, I mean, I think we all heard that California is really entering the execution era of offshore wind. Because, as you all know, we have now early public funding and great commitment from the state. You heard from the CEC chairman this morning. You'll hear from other state leaders all day long. And we have big challenges, long lead infrastructure timelines, something that I feel like I spend a lot of time talking with Suzanne and Chris about. Global competition for supply chain capacity. First of a kind floating deployment at scale in the US. And of course, the current federal opposition. So our conversation is really about moving from ambition to steel in the water. What it takes, what we've learned globally, and what must happen next. So I am going to ask each panelist to give a very brief bio and talk about what piece of the supply chain they are most focused on in California.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Again, Suzanne Plesia, the Managing Director of Engineering Services at the Port of Long Beach. And for the port, we have a concept for the Pure Wind Terminal, and we are focused in on the staging and assembly part of the supply chain.
Chris Mickelson, the Port of Humboldt Bay, or the Humboldt Bay Harbor District. We are focusing on a staging integration port, and very excited to continue to collaborate with each and every one of you, especially our partners at the Port of Long Beach. State Lands Commission, you know, we have an MOU together. We want to keep this thing going.
Carol Oldham, Foss Terminals, and I would say that we wear many hats in the offshore wind supply chain. We do transportation and installation. We just completed doing the barge feeder, the feeder barge solution for Vineyard Wind. And then we also develop and operate terminals for offshore wind. So we're both on the sea side and on the land side.
Hi, everyone. I'm Seth Price, Vice President of Product Industrialization at Principal Power. Principal Power is a floating offshore wind technology and services company. We're headquartered in the San Francisco Bay Area, so nicely situated between the Port of Humboldt and Port of Long Beach. We have 105 megawatts deployed internationally in Portugal, France, and Scotland. In the California market at this point, we're really focusing on ways to support the execution planning, working with the ports, working with the supply chain, and we have quite a few different working groups which we participate in there. And really looking forward to making these projects deliverable.
Great. So I'll follow up with Suzanne. I mean, for any of you that have not seen the presentations about Pure Wind, it's one of the most ambitious offshore wind projects in the United States. What do you feel like it really looks like for a port that needs to support floating wind at scale?
Well, right now, we're focusing on being ready. And to be ready, it means about delivering the right infrastructure at the right time. But what does the right infrastructure look like in an emerging industry? Particularly around, it's about getting infrastructure that takes us from the pilot scale all the way into the commercial serial production that's going to achieve the economies of scale that we're going to need for that commercial scale. And so what does that look like right now when it's an emerging industry? It's going to take a lot of engagement with our industry partners, looking at what are those technologies, what are those assembly schemes, and making sure that the infrastructure as we design it is going to take an envelope approach so it can accommodate many different technologies and assembly schemes and be also flexible and adaptable and allow for that future innovation that we know is happening right now. And the right infrastructure is also going to be informed by our community, tribal, our labor partners from the ILWU and the building trades, and more. And so right now, it's going to take an extensive amount of outreach and engagement to help inform that design. But thankfully, the right time right now is to do that work so that we're ready in the future when it needs to be deployed. You know, thankfully, to the voters and to the CEC for our grant this last year, we're able to move forward with that design and environmental review and that extensive outreach that we're going to need to do to inform that design. So we're really excited about keeping to move this project forward so that we're ready to deliver when it is the right time, in collaboration with our rest of our partners at the state around transmission and procurement, and with our development partners at the wind farm.
Great. So, Chris, we're glad to have you here today. Subbing for Rob, I know. It's like, but we're really lucky because Chris has been quite the advocate for Humboldt. And we know that Humboldt is often described as ground zero for floating offshore wind on the West Coast because there's the best wind is off of Humboldt. How do you translate that vision into an operational port?
Well, I'd like to start with a little Humboldt rap.
Okay.
No, just kidding. No rap today. But every time I get a mic, I like to have a little bit of fun. So, quick point of order. I just want to mention, Nancy, my feet still don't touch the floor. 4 years in a row. So, but it's all right. Anyways, I won't use that joke next year. Go Humboldt. I see how many of you out there. Thank you. Really happy that you guys are here. But let's be grateful to Long Beach. The fact that they're hosting for us this year is absolutely amazing. Recognize, look around this room, you're no longer strangers. Each and every one of you, you know one another. I saw it last night at the reception. There were more hugs than handshakes. That's how Humboldt gets ready. It's all about collaboration. It's about partnering with one another, and it's about learning from each other. We look at Humboldt, it's a legacy lumber site. We always say, or I always say, it was soup to nuts. We started with logs in one end, and we had pulp coming out the other end. That doesn't sound like a very good analogy. In any event, this is a very legacy site. 120 years of very large production, major timber port, and over 30 years it disappeared. So now we have a brownfield listed site that this project will help to clean up, bring our community health. We have the opportunity to create an everlasting job opportunity and not have a boom and bust industry. But we have great engagement that has to occur in our town. We love Humboldt. We have a very special way of life there, and we recognize the environmental sensitivity where we're at. We recognize that we have a very large tribal population, one of the largest in the state. All of you have to be a part of this project. The engagement can't happen enough. Let's design this together. Let's build it. But we are here for the industry. We have incredible winds. We're uniquely situated. We have 168 rentable acres for development, a little over 200 that'll support our mitigation area. We have the support and mentorship of so many. We have the California Energy Commission behind us. And I believe at some point the federal government will come back around. We lost a massive grant this past year. You all know it. But the US DOT was good to work with. They were very respectful and very kind. So we're optimistic. Humboldt's going to get it done. Is that right, Sean? That's right.
Great. That's what we need from everyone every day. So Seth, I want to switch over to you. I know I'm going not in my order here, but so I've had the pleasure of working really closely with Principal Power now for, I don't know, 8, 9 years. It's a long time. And you all have been the, the first movers in so many ways. So we know that floating offshore wind is still in a commercialization phase. What are some of the biggest risks that developers, investors, and the ports need to understand right now?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of risks right now that are coming from a variety of avenues for floating wind. No one can deny that. I also want to be cautious here in terms of telling developers and ports and supply chain what they need to know, because I think there's many people in this room who know far more than myself. But that being said, I think I can do a good job of maybe outlining some of the things that we've been seeing over the last 10 years, specifically in deploying a lot of our international projects, and ideally how we can work to solve some of those in California. I want to talk more on sort of the deployment risks and challenges, but I think first and foremost, you do have to get things right from the beginning, and some of that is around things like auction design, making sure we just have the right frameworks in place that have things like non-price criteria baked in so that we can focus more on deliverability. You know, Vestas had a good slogan at one point, we don't want projects on paper, we want projects in the water. And so I do think there's a lot we can do in terms of frameworks, but also things like ways we can create that sort of procurement volume certainty so that there is the confidence from the suppliers, from the supply chain, from the ports to be able to invest and help to unlock and solve a lot of those chicken and egg situations that we're going to find ourselves in California. I think one of the biggest risks we have when we were riding that wave and we were at the peak of it around 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of unrealistic plans that were put out there. And I think one of the most important things you can do is be working with real partners who have real experience, and that's across the full sort of delivery chain. Obviously on the technology side, it's important to be working with wind turbine suppliers and platform providers who have experience out there, understand what it takes to actually deliver these projects. But it's fabricators, it's transportation installation contractors, it's vessel suppliers. And it's ideally working with people who have worked together in the past. It's not necessarily shaking hands and meeting the first time on a project. I know everyone throws out MOUs and things like that. Sometimes they're not worth the piece of paper they're written on, but sometimes you find partners who are actually collaborating, projecting ahead to what the problems are and solving those problems before they get on a project. Whether it's improvements for design for fabrication, whether it's finding ways that you can de-risk the transportation, there's a lot that can be done before you get on a project. And then I think financing projects is frankly a big risk right now. The actual amount that the project costs is important. There's a lot of efforts that need to be done in reducing CapEx, but I think the biggest things right now around reducing risk. So I do think these are going to be first-of-a-kind projects, so they are going to be looking for companies that have, frankly, a big enough bankroll to be able to support these projects. And they also are going to be looking for technologies that have some ability or some performance of being proven in the past. I think in terms of balancing risks, that's one of the biggest challenges. There's a lot of different ways that you can contractually set these things up. Who's willing to take on those liabilities is a big challenge in the industry right now. You have EPC, you have multi-contract, and you have an abundance of schemes in between. I think we're seeing a lot of people starting to take a look at more like multi-EPC approaches, breaking it up into manageable packages. But overall, this is a big part right now, is how to get these projects financed and who takes on the risk without ballooning the cost so much that they're no longer feasible. Maybe the last thing I'll say is I think we do need to continue to incorporate the lessons learned internationally in terms of, on the platform design. We're seeing the start of a consolidation and standardization to a certain general architecture, a family of architectures. We're starting to see things converge in towards the 4-column steel semi-submersibles. It's not to say that there aren't other designs out there, but we're starting to see a bit of convergence, and I think that's streamlining a lot of things then with how do we transport these, what are the requirements for the port, things of that nature. So that will happen organically, and I think the other thing that's really important is we always talk about these learning curves, and from my experience, sort of the benefit of a learning curve or the benefits of economies of scale, they do happen, but it's not always organic. There needs to be a really tangible effort towards those things. So on the fabrication side, on the pre-commercial projects, when there's 1 to 3 units, it's not always easy to see, maybe you decrease the subcomponent manufacturing time a bit between units 1 and 3, but then you're done. I think ideally what we want in all these projects is to really benefit from these learning curves, have units 1 through 8 showcase, a real efficiency gain, and then be able to ride that efficiency gain in units 8 through 50. So I guess the risk there is that we don't learn and incorporate those learnings, and I think that needs to be a big focus for California. We're delayed because of some reasons beyond our control, but we can do a lot to incorporate all the international learnings.
Right. That might be a good segue to FOSS, because you have been learning every day.
That is true.
From a marine logistics and terminal perspective, what do you feel like it really takes to move, assemble, and deploy the floating structures in the future?
Yeah, so you're right. We have been learning a lot over time, and I think that there are a couple. There's the obvious stuff of being a first mover is slower than you would like. Being a first mover is more expensive than you would like. But then there are other things too. Like, I think one of the things, to your point, is sometimes rethinking and getting a little creative about the model that you use. So as I mentioned, we developed the feeder barge solution for Vineyard Wind, and that was based on a whole bunch of constraints, including the Jones Act. And so we were able to come up with a creative solution that worked, and that actually may end up being more efficient or as efficient as the other, the European model of installation. So I think, we're interested to look at some of those numbers over time and figure out where we are with that. But I think we also we're also looking towards the future when it comes to thinking about floating here, because we've got a grant from NowRDC, shout out to NowRDC out there, to develop a floating platform, or a platform to launch floating foundations. And the whole purpose of that is to figure out how to allow ports to more efficiently do what they do, and get manufactured items into the water as necessary, so that we can speed that development process and really get the items in the water that need to be in the water.
Great. So that is good. This is good. My segue. And really about how do we get from designing the ports and terminals for the systems that we know today, or the systems that we need 20 years from now. So I don't know if, I feel like the Port of Long Beach is thinking about that a lot in everything that you do. So.
Yeah, and I did touch on this a little bit in the
Yeah.
beginning, and really excited to share the stage here with Seth and Carol, to love to see the innovation. And this theme, Chris, thank you for touching on this, how important it is, especially right now, that we are sharing information, that we are collaborating. It's so important that we want to see this innovation to continue. All of that's going to be really good for us, making it more efficient, more cost effective. We don't want, as a port, to have our infrastructure hinder that. We want to make sure that it helps facilitate that. So right now it's super important to have that cross-industry collaboration, and share those lessons learned, learning from our international partners as well, and ensuring that our infrastructure can deliver that promise to hit that commercial scale.
I don't know, Chris, if you have any other thoughts about that?
Sure. First off, I was very fortunate to visit New Bedford. Congratulations. what an incredible sight to see, and the successes that have been out there. So congratulations to Foss and to Vineyard Wind. Suzanne, you hit it. I think we've all mentioned it today. This is about deep community and industry collaboration. You hear me say it all the time. You see me quoted in these interviews that we do periodically. But it allows our projects to improve. That's what really allows us to grow. We're kind of a juvenile industry on the U.S. West Coast. We're a first of its kind, the deepest floating waters out there. No one's done this before. Y'all are pioneers. This is an amazing thing we're doing. But we can't spend a day without collaborating with one another, with the industry, lessons learned from previous projects, where we're headed, and again, don't forget our workforce and our communities and our tribal government, because that's who we are collectively.
Great.
Maybe just to add on one thing on the collaboration piece, I think one of the things that's been really helpful is there needs to be fixed constraints so people know what to work within, and there also needs to be flexibility. And I think in the engagement between, for example, the platform designers and the ports is very helpful in that there will be some things that will be very difficult to upgrade over a 20, 30, 40-year period. And they need to have the foresight to be able to understand, okay, these are the maximum bearing capacities we can really withstand over that period, and that's a fixed constraint. And then, I think on the platform side, realistically, I know there's been infinite growth over the last years in terms of wind turbine size, but that's got to stop at some point, and I think we've seen that sort of start to level off around the 15 megawatt, possibly getting up to 20 megawatt range for California. And so I think when you're looking at flexibility, there does need to be some constraint on the platform side and wind turbine side, but there also, in terms of how the ports are designed, I think there's a lot of opportunity for having some flexibility in terms of how the space is used. If it's a smaller foundation, maybe you can have 8 final assembly bays and be doing 8 units in parallel. If in 15 years, the new turbine is the 18 megawatt turbine, that's what everyone's using, and it requires a little bit bigger foundation, maybe we have 6 final assembly bays. So I think finding that balance of fixed constraints and flexibility on both sides is really important.
Yeah, I'd like to just second
Yeah.
that because I think that's super important. I think also just to harken back to your point earlier about risk and who bears what risk. And I think that is that the flexibility is more available when the risk is clearly defined and when it is not pushed all the way down the supply chain and put in places where it cannot be borne. So I would just encourage decision makers to think about where the risk lies, because where the risk lies is where expense lies as well, right? Risk is very expensive, and when you can take as much of that out of the system with that flexibility, but not not a desire to we can do anything over any period of time, then it's just, it's going to save the ratepayers money.
Right, which is obviously a big discussion these days, understandably so, with all the different items that are impacting the electricity system. So, and I think what you're talking about, since we're entering the offshore wind market overall after Europe and Asia, what do you feel like are what is a clear advantage that you would say for developing out this supply chain and the ports really being ready? And what is a disadvantage with, in a way, going second? Do you want to start, Seth, maybe? Yeah.
Sure. I do think there's a lot of advantages. I mean, the obvious disadvantage is we would love to be having wind turbines in the water tomorrow. Yeah. But I think there's a lot of advantages, and trying to be optimistic, I'm going to focus, I guess, more on those. It's an opportunity to capture all the lessons learned and to be able to reduce risks across the projects. And reducing that risk obviously has significant impacts on getting financing and also having the supply chain being willing to invest in these projects, having them be attractive. I think you may have mentioned it, Nancy, but floating offshore wind, is very global, but it's also very regional. And if a region is not attractive enough, there's a limited supply chain, and folks will be investing their resources in areas where it's more attractive. I think in Europe, I think I wrote down here, there's a lot of similarities in that although they may have more longer-term visibility and federal policy support, they also have a lot of constraints in that they're building a new industry for floating offshore wind, and they've had to look at models that could use more of a distributed supply chain and figuring out how they're going to import in different types of components, assemble those locally, and also essentially building some of that industrial capacity at the same time. In Asia, I think there's a lot of opportunity to learn from the maritime shipbuilding and oil and gas fabrication areas, and to be able to incorporate those in the design. So I think overall, it's really a good opportunity. I think we can learn a lot, and California is different. It was mentioned, it's deeper waters, there's certain constraints, there's Jones Act compliant, there's all these things. So I think for any offshore wind project, there's certain things that are standard good practices, and there's always going to have to be a regional execution plan that's optimized for all the weird things you're going to find in any given geography.
I would say one thing, too, that's a big advantage that I think touches on what you're just saying is there will be supply chain consolidation, and that's actually not a bad thing. I think sort of figuring out how we speak to the strengths of what gets built where, what gets manufactured where, rather than trying to be everything to everyone, again, saves time, saves investments, actually ends up creating more jobs because you don't have folks who train for making one thing and then all of a sudden the factory has to close or whatever. So I think it's actually really good in the long run to have some of that supply chain consolidation and end up with something being made where it makes sense to make it.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just add on to that.
Yeah.
Obviously, I love learning somebody else's lessons instead of my own. But, I think, we've seen sort of where it's done really well, and I think we can acknowledge that there have been some trips globally as well. And so, we get to learn those lessons, particularly around smart policy. And then Seth, you touched on this earlier. We got to make that procurement something that can follow all the way through on such a long lead time infrastructure. The procurement has to be really, really smart so that once we get to ready to construct and financing these projects, that they can carry all the way through. So, obviously learning someone else's lessons and putting together really smart policies around that procurement and the system that we need to build here in California. And of course, yes, tailored to our unique situation in California. I think that's going to be a real advantage for us here in California.
Yeah, it's making me think about our both through Oceanic, our West Coast Supplier Council work, and to have folks from kind of the different pieces of the supply chain really taking a look and trying to get into the nitty-gritty, I would say, of it. So obviously the other thing that, you're going to hear a lot more about this, but the impact of community engagement. We keep talking about it, but I would actually say that it feels more and more real, almost because we've been at this for so long, and it's hard. But I know here and in Humboldt, you're looking at what does it take to build a green terminal, and what does it take to green an entire port. So I'd love to have you talk about that, and also when do you engage, communities and workforce partners in something that you have to talk about a lot before we actually get to do it. So, you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to go first. Well, zero emissions is the goal. We all know that. And we've got to get there. Everybody's tired of hearing we've got a climate crisis, but it's pretty darn obvious. A green terminal starts with very basic things. In our case, we have an EPA brownfield site we talked about. And the US EPA is supporting us. We have one of our many grants is a community-wide assessment grant that's going to allow us to look at the legacy that was there before, assess it in a great way, and clean those lands up. And when we clean those lands up, we also clean up the health of those neighboring those sites. Pretty important thing to do. I'm going to repeat myself because I don't know that everyone's heard this, but I grew up in a lumber mill. I worked in one. I handled chemicals, as did my mother, my father, my brothers. And, we worked with treated lumber. We had a teepee burner. I played in that as a kid. I think I shared with you all once before that black spent sawdust makes really nice pavement for a kid playing with his Tonka toys. So I played in those. They're not healthy, by the way. In my family of 5, you'll remember me saying this, we all worked in that mill. I'm the only person who hasn't been treated for or died of cancer. So cleaning up these sites, this is legacy stuff. And that's step 1 is land recycling and being green. By doing it, we take the pressure off of open space. We don't have to go out and create new land in order to do these sites. We are going to do it on a recycled land site. We're going to strive for the best electrification day 1. Is it easy? No. But is it a commitment? As long as it's an inward one. And we all have to make that inward commitment to stay focused on it and do all we can. I know the industry's doing it. I know that our state building trades and our workforce development out there is focused on doing it. And we have great examples from terminals all around. Look at the commitment the Port of Long Beach has made to a green terminal strategy or a green port strategy. So this is happening. Again, I'm going to say it again, it goes back to collaboration. But we've got to strive for green. That is an important part of our community engagement, which was your bigger question, is when's the time for community engagement? It was 5 years ago. It's right now, and it's tomorrow, and it's everlasting, and we can't stop doing it. I said it earlier, our project gets better and better and better because we engage with our community. Because we engage with tribal government, we engage with workforce, we engage with college students, we engage with interns, we engage with the industry, and we engage with our next door neighbors. Sometimes it's a simple cup of coffee, sometimes it's having a committee come into our office on a recurring basis and having a slice of pizza. But in Humboldt Bay, this is your bay. These are your lands. As residents of the state of California, these are your great lands. By all means, you have a voice in what this is going to become. And our projects are going to make it because you participated. So yeah, let's engage now, and let's engage often.
Yeah, really well said, Chris. For the Port of Long Beach, and we just talked about lessons learned, we're always happy to share our lesson learned and why we became the green port. We don't want other ports to have to learn that same lesson. We grew and had a massive impact on our local community. That led us to our green port policy and this journey we've been on to reduce that impact. So, for us, if we talk about going in and building a facility to support offshore wind, it is of course going to be in alignment with that same green terminal strategy so that it doesn't then become additive burden on our community. And just echoing what Chris just said, yeah, the time was 5 years ago and yesterday and tomorrow and continuous from here. Because, again, our design has to be informed by our community, tribal, industry, labor partners, everyone, to ensure that it reaches its full benefit and supports not just the state, but our community and their objectives as well. So, yeah, really excited for all of our partners that have joined us today. Your participation here is really, really important, not just today, but also going forward from here as well. So thank you.
Great. So we're getting to the end of our time. So since there's so many policymakers, big thinkers, and decision makers here, what is one decision or action that California must take in the next 12 to 24 months to stay on track? You can say anything, even if you think it's unrealistic, but we can work on it.
Well, I'll start, just because I always get really energized when I listen to Chair Hochschild. And so I'm really excited about the step that the CEC has taken to do the investigation. And for me, it's staying that course collectively as a state on this commitment to move forward with offshore wind. So keep making those statements and making those steps, and we'll be there together with all of you.
Well, the question is, are we going to lead or are we going to follow? And no doubt about it, we're going to lead. That's what we do as ports, and that's what we do as Californians. I'm not running for office, by the way, but I absolutely love this state. I think we also have to, as we continue to ask for investment, we have to remember there's great industry that's out there today. In Humboldt, it's aquaculture. We're one of the most vital parts of the shellfish industry on the West Coast. So as we invest in wind or we invest on renewables, we also have to consider what's out there and how we may affect some of those things and give great credence to the industries that exist. And so I'd like to see us continue to lead, but let's not just focus on a new industry. Let's figure out how we can complement that already exists.
Great.
So I think I would just go back to the procurement piece and providing enough certainty to do some de-risking for all of us, for the supply chain, and I think the state can send a really good signal when it comes to kind of how they structure the procurements and how they're talking about structuring the procurements and who they're talking to about that, and that could really bear very good fruit later.
You stole mine, which is totally fine. I'll just second it. I fully agree. I think finding a way to make California as attractive as possible for developers, for the supply chain, for the ports who are, considering investing substantially and are requiring private investment into those to make them feasible. I think that's very important. Procurement is a huge part of that, but there's other things that can also make a region very attractive. Again, I guess just echoing my previous point in that it's a regional industry, but it's competing in a global market. I'm continually working with fabricators and other parts of the supply chain who are questioning, why would I work in California right now where we have this other near-term opportunity that can help my cash flow in the next 2 years, as opposed to betting on something 10 years from now that may or may not solidify. And I think California is a very, very attractive market in the medium term, and I think even if there's things that we can't do because of federal opposition in the near term, there's a lot of things we can do to send the right signals so that the supply chain is ready to go when the time comes.
Great. So, as you hear, this is hard work, you all know it, capital intensive and first of its kind. It's going to require and is requiring already coordination across ports, technology. We didn't even really get into vessels, which I spend a lot of time thinking about with my colleagues, and policy. And it feels like a long window, but it's narrow. So in a way, we want to leave you today that we just need champions. We need a lot of champions. You're going to hear from one of the biggest champions very soon. But we need many more, and we need all of you. So with that, thank you, and we all look forward to continuing to collaborate.